Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first customer. My name is Jay Agner. Today I'm lucky enough to be joined by the Bob Cooper. Bob, welcome.
Hi Jay, thanks for having me.
You're welcome, man. Thanks for joining. So, Bob is a founder of a lot of different things. I used to work at a company that Bob was a co founder of. But let's take it back to the beginning, Bob. Where'd you come from? Where'd you go to school?
I grew up in Pittsburgh and I went to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and I was a journalism major mainly because I was really bad at math. So that was the decision process there. And really, what I wanted to get into was advertising. This was back in the early '80s. I graduated in '83 from college, and the economy in Pittsburgh was really, really bad. So ended up not being able to find a job. Literally, in the first year after I got out of
Hmm.
college, I was a lifeguard, believe it or not, for a year after I got out of college, trying to find a job, and I ended up getting a job as a technical writer. Couldn't get a job as marketing to save my life. Ended up doing technical writing for a small software company that was launching accounting software for PCs. I knew nothing about
Right.
PCs. These were brand new machines. I knew
Right.
nothing about
Yeah.
accounting software, but it was a good fit. I think I was making $12,000 a year back then, so it was a good fit. But it was a great exercise in just learning how to swim, basically, in an environment like that. So I did that for about a year, and then moved out to Philadelphia. Ended up getting another technical writing job. Stayed about a year up in Reading, and then got a job in Philadelphia with a marketing communications company called LSI Communications. They did everything from brochures to film and video production to big sales meetings for people like Verizon, et cetera. So I worked there for a couple years, and I was a writer basically, and then became a producer, project manager. And at that time, I sort of had my epiphany, I call it, where I was at a some conference or exhibition or whatnot. There was and again, this is the late '80s, mid '80s, right? And there was a interactive tour of Tulum, the pyramids of Tulum, Mexico.
Hmm.
It was on a computer, and there was a joystick, and you could basically move the joystick forward or turn right, turn left, and tour through this. And I literally, you talk about these light bulb moments. I'm imagining, wow, imagine if you could combine the power of video with the power of these personal computers, right? And it would merge, and I mean, it could be interactive. It's like interactive video, and I just became like sort of obsessed with this concept, and got very involved when I was at LSI in a number of projects. Helped sell these projects, design them, produce them, and these were fairly big. Ended up, doing museum work. We did a lot of kiosk work. Did the Constitution, the during the celebration of the anniversary of the Constitution, National
Hmm.
Park Service. We created a bunch of stuff for them. We Bell Atlantic at the time, which turned to Verizon, was a big customer. We also did a retail kiosk project. We had about 500 interactive multimedia kiosks in flooring stores around the country. So I was very keen on this. I tried to convince the owner of the business that this is really the future, that he should really get out of print work and out of, linear video, et cetera, and get into interactive video. And he didn't really want to, wasn't really interested. So uh, I started getting a bug for starting my own business, thinking, what if I could do this on my own? That was
Right.
also further aggravated by the birth of my first daughter. Right, I was like, man, I gotta this provider. They call it, the nesting instinct kicks in for
Yep.
women, and I think the provider instinct kicks in for me
That's
anyway.
I never heard that, but that's very I hear that a lot.
Yeah,
I never heard it put that way. That's and I feel very similar. That's interesting.
yeah, and so I had this new desire to succeed, and so my first business, and I had a bunch of ideas. I'd worked with a guy. My very first one, I actually started. So my first customer of my first business I ever started was, I was like, how can I start a business without necessarily letting go, right,
Right.
or quitting my job? So
Yep.
I go and I'm like racking my brain. And back then, I had found somewhere, stumbled across these things called removable tattoos from Japan, but they were
Okay.
high quality. This wasn't like Bazooka Joe stuff like from when I
Right.
was a
Right.
kid.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
were actually high quality. Uh, and back in the day, nobody had ever seen these before. And so I find this supplier. I end up buying a classified ad in the back of Rolling Stone magazine. You
Wow.
know, are you afraid of commitment? Do you want to, but you always wanted a tattoo? Try these temporary tattoos. And I put this ad in. I had like no money. And this is back in days of again, pre-web, send a self-addressed stamped envelope,
Wow.
SASE,
Yep. Oh
to
yeah.
my
Yep.
PO box in Paoli, Pennsylvania, and I'll send you our catalog, quote unquote, which was basically a sheet of paper Xeroxed, black and white, which I had done at the library, trying to sell color tattoos via black and white brochure, right? Uh, but I had a number of people send in, these SASEs, self-addressed stamped envelopes. I sent out the catalogs, and next thing you know, I get back. The first thing I get back is an envelope, and it says, "This envelope has been opened and reviewed by the Bureau of Prisons of Illinois." And it turns out my first customer for tattoos was somebody in jail,
Ah, it's such a
basically,
great story.
who,
What a
who
great
who
story.
sent me
Oh.
cash in this envelope. And so that was a little business. I was getting these
Ah.
emails back and forth, and or not emails, rather letters, basically, and sending these things up. It was a very, very small business, micro
Sure.
business.
Yeah.
Um, Another business, and that never went. I think I ran that ad maybe for 2 or 3 months, and realized I wasn't going to be able to quit my job based on temporary tattoo
Right.
income.
Right.
And so a buddy of mine, people get together and talk about, hey, we should start a business, right? And so a guy I worked with, and an idea we had was starting an online marketplace. Back in the day, there was a shortage of RAM chips for
Mm-hmm.
RAM memory, and
Yep.
back in that late '80s, there were FedEx guys and UPS drivers being held up at gunpoint to steal boxes of RAM that they were carrying. It was literally it's worth its weight in gold. So,
Right. Right.
and I was like, man, there must be a better way, because we used to have to buy these RAM chips for different projects we were doing, these kiosk proprietary devices and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the old days was, you call people up, hey, do you have any XJ1 Texas Instrument
Right.
doodads, right? And they say, no, but I think so and so does. And I thought, man, there's got to be a better way to connect these people. And this is, again, pre-web, but there were these things back in the day called bulletin board systems,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just text, green screen text-based systems. But they basically hooked them up with modems, early days of 1200 baud modems.
Oh yeah.
And the idea was, what if we could create this place where buyers and sellers could come together to find who has what chips? Basically, today we would call that a marketplace, right?
Right. Yep.
And my buddy, his uncle, was going to loan us some money to buy the computers, to buy some modems, to get us set up. I actually wrote a press release. The company's called Info America. I wrote a press release about how we created this online marketplace to connect buyers and sellers of computer chips. And I put a phone number in there, and I put it under Natalie's name because I didn't want to expose me having, work in this. And I came home one day, back in the old day of tape-based voicemail machines,
Yep.
right? Answering machines.
Oh yeah.
I come home, and there's like 20 requests on there for more information. Hey, Bob, this is so and so. I work for Hewlett Packard. We're interested in participating in your online
Wow.
marketplace. And so we actually had customers lined up, but it came down to the idea of uh, buying the hardware and the software. And when it came down to it, I just chickened out. Is like, yeah, we could. Your uncle's going to loan us this. I think it was like he's going to loan us $5,000 to get
Mm-hmm.
this thing going. But I kept drilling in my head, but what if this fails? I'm going to owe this guy $2,500. I don't have $2,500.
Right. Right.
What? Oh my God. And so never did it. And that was a regret, because there was a
Mm-hmm.
viable business there. Somebody else actually came and did that same thing about a year later, in an online marketplace. But anyway, long story short, my second daughter was born, and I realized I got to do something here. And so my boss at the marketing company wasn't interested in focusing on interactive video or multimedia, what it was becoming called then. So I decided to leave. Prior to that, I'd reached out to some people that I'd met in business. At
Mm-hmm.
one stop, I worked for a small ad agency in Exton, Pennsylvania. We had pitched a guy for his business. He had just sold his software company to Xerox and had spent his life, or not a life, but he spent a year traveling the world installing that software around the world. I thought, man, that's really cool, because he was the first entrepreneur I'd ever met. I grew up in
Sure.
a
Yeah.
family, nobody was entrepreneurs, nobody owned a
Mm-hmm.
business. Uh, and so like, this is the kind of guy I'm reading about in Inc. magazine. This is like
Right.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
software entrepreneur. And so his name was Arthur Kramer. I kept him in mind. I met him back in like 85. I called him in, 80, 90, probably 1990. I said, you probably don't remember me. We met one time during a pitch. We didn't get your business. It was 5 years ago. I have an idea to start a business. I'd like to get your advice. Can I buy you lunch? And he was like, "Who are you? What is this?" And so um, we ended up going to the International House of Pancakes down in Rittenhouse Square nearby there.
Love it.
And he basically opened my eyes to the idea that instead of me just quitting and working as a freelancer, I should actually start a company, because a lot of the projects I was working on were for big companies, IBM, Rockwell, Bell Atlantic slash
Hmm.
Verizon, et cetera. And he basically said, you should, and he walked me through the idea of raising some money. So he introduced me to some friends. Um, these were all guys that were a generation older than me, had been successful entrepreneurs. We put a deal together and founded, Frontier Media Group, which my vision was we were going to basically be a cross between an ad agency and a custom software company. And
Hmm.
basically, very creative, very technology, and using this for marketing purposes. And keep in mind, this is years before the web was
Right. Yeah.
really.
What year? When did you start Frontier?
Frontier was 1991.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
in
So
answer
still
to,
super early internet
yeah,
days. Yeah.
yeah. And so, in answer to the question, so I had basically put, I guess it was in the 1990 in the fall. I was talking to Arthur, and how would you put something like this together, et cetera. And months went by, months went by. We're dealing with a lawyer. I'm completely neophyte. I'm a newbie in terms of how to structure something like this,
Right.
right? So fortunately, I was very fortunate that I ended up with good guys that have a lot of integrity. So we put a deal together, and and I realized I actually before the deal was even done, I realized I had to quit my job. I mean, the saying, you can't steal second base with your foot on first. Right? So I said I got to quit. So I left the company in May, put in my notice. So my first customer, ironically, of Frontier Media Group was my old employer, because I was
That's
work.
not that happens a lot. I actually
Yeah,
hear that quite often that's the case
yeah.
because it's relationships. All relationships you built there carry on to whatever you do after.
Correct, right. And so I ended up, it was kind of cool because I was doing a project at the time for them, sponsored by DuPont, which was for the Paris Air Show. So I ended up
Oh
getting to
wow,
go to the Paris Air Show with
wow,
my new client, which was my old employer,
wow.
to set up this interactive display for their exhibit at the Paris Air Show. So that was very cool. But our real first client was Mannington Mills, which is one of the companies that I had worked with on the kiosk, the retail kiosk project.
Hmm.
Because really, I was the driving force of that, et cetera. And when I left, there was no non. I had no non-compete. There was no non-competes. There was no contracts with clients holding them
Right.
in or anything like that. Over the summer, I had basically gone back and talked to a couple guys that had worked with me at that company. Once I secured the funding for my angel investors, I went back to them and said, "Look, I will match your salary plus 10%, give you an extra week's vacation. Uh, I think there's a huge promise here, upside. Why don't you come on over?" And and gave a couple of these guys some equity when we got started. And so that's when we started. Three guys came over from that company, and my sister-in-law. Our official start date was the day after Labor Day in September, whatever date that was. We had gotten office space in the Great Valley Corporate Center, but it wasn't
Yeah.
finished yet. It was a tiny little space. They had to put carpet in or something. So we're like, okay, for the first week, we're going to work out of my house, right? And there's no wireless, there's no Wi-Fi.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm literally taking my phone line from my kitchen and running it into the living room. We have card tables set up. We've got cardboard boxes. There's the five of us in my living room of my little house. We're like, oh my god, I can't believe it! High fives. We're actually starting a business. Here we go. And it's like 9 o'clock in the morning. We're just getting settled in and drinking our coffee. And all of a sudden, I hear, I'm like, oh, what is this? I go over and there's somebody at the door. I look out. There's a police car out in the front of my house, and it's the Chester County Sheriff. He says, "Are you Robert Cooper?" I'm like, "Yes." He goes, "Well, you've been served. You're being sued." Oh, so my former employer was suing me,
Hmm.
basically for a number of things, including racketeering, basically. And so this is one of these lawsuits that's really not a valid lawsuit. It's really designed to put you out of business or just be a complete nuisance.
Right.
And so, that was my literally first hour in business. We got sued, literally. Uh,
Racketeering. What are the? How? Was there
Because
any?
his argument was that Mannington Mills was a New Jersey-based company. My company was Pennsylvania-based, and he was basically saying that I conspired, to take this client prior to leaving, which was absolutely not true because I didn't want any
Right.
hassle with anybody. There was so much opportunity. I didn't need Mannington to become a client. I was,
Sure.
and that's why I raised the money because I had a sales guy, we had a creative guy, we had a technical guy, we had a designer, project manager. So we had basically built a plan that we weren't going to go after Mannington. But the fact was, Mannington realized all my people were gone,
Right.
right?
Well, how did you get into that VC world where you started asking people for money? Where did you acquire that skill set?
Uh, well, it was just I made it up basically with my angels. I mean, it was the first time I'd ever done that, and then
Right.
I started to understand, debt and equity and how these things work and returns and what they're looking for in terms of return, et cetera. So the great news is they served as advisors to me. They weren't just investors. I would bring
Mm-hmm.
them out I'd ask them to come out to our office like every month or every 6 weeks. I'd buy them a box lunch and I would just basically just pick their brains. Here's what's going on. I've never experienced this. What would you do in this case? And it could be
Right.
everything from managing employees to sales to legal issues to accounting, etc. Right? And they just gave me some really good, solid advice that I
Sure.
would never have otherwise known. So learned from that. That business. Fast forward, went on. To great success. We couple of highlights. One is we, after about 2 years, decided to really focus, go deep on a vertical. We were, up until then, we were sort of doing anything for anybody
Sure.
for money, for
Mm-hmm.
interactive multimedia, big companies, small companies. And two things happened. One, I was looking at the Fortune 100 list, Fortune 500 list, and it was divided up into a whole bunch of different sorts, right, in the magazine. And one of them was profitability. The most profitable industry in the United States was tobacco. Like, I don't want to work for tobacco.
Right.
Second most profitable was pharmaceutical. I'm like, oh, interesting. And then it broke it down by where headquarters were located. I'm like, and all these
Mm-hmm.
pharmaceutical companies, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware. We had done some work with Wyeth. I came in to our sales guy the next day and said, right now your prospect book is Yellow Pages. Your new prospect list of these 12 companies. And he was like, oh my God, you're taking food out of my mouth. How am I going to survive,
Right. Right.
on such a limited number? Long story short, he pretty much doubled his income over the next, 12 to 18 months because
Yep.
we focused on that vertical and that became a real niche for us. So ultimately, when I sold the business, we were probably had worked with 14 of the top 15 pharmaceutical companies.
Wow.
And we would get clients, we would not lose them. And I wanted that place to be the kind of place I wanted to work. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was based on that vision. Of course, the web came along about midway, about 95. We're like, what is this web thing? We're doing all this high end interactive
Mm-hmm.
video, multilingual soundtracks,
Right.
you know. And all of a sudden now people are like excited because you can click on a hyperlink of a word. I'm like,
Right.
where's the video? Where's the interactivity?
Right.
Where's the multilingual? Where's the instant access?
Mm-hmm.
But the flip side of the paradigm shift obviously was that there was no dedicated multimedia machine for $12,000. This was on the web, accessible anywhere, anytime. So we pivoted. We got involved in web development more so on what back then was called intranet development,
Mm-hmm.
internal tools, etc. So we had pharmaceutical and financial. We ended up getting to a point we added strategy into that. So it was a three-legged stool: technology, creativity, strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great. We were at the high end of the market. We rarely lost pitches, and we rarely lost clients. Had a great esprit de corps. The culture was fantastic, etc. But I also knew that there was going to be a time to sell this business because I had
Right.
investors, and they want a return on their investment. And the other thing, if you don't, I don't know if you remember this, but there's things called Y2K
Oh yeah.
looming on the horizon, that everything was going to melt down and break, at
Mm-hmm.
stroke of midnight. And it was a real concern. I mean, it was a concern for
Oh
enterprise
yeah.
clients. And I
Yeah.
was like, man, what would happen to my business if we're caught up in the wake of that, right? All of a sudden, our
Right.
customers are dealing with all these Y2K emerging. They're not going to be paying us to do, interactive marketing stuff. So the market was heating up. We ended up doing a deal. Didn't do an auction or anything like that. Didn't hire a banker. Just basically put some feelers out there. Some of my investors had some connections, and pretty short order, we had offers from a couple different companies, and some again who saw us. We had an offer from a large ad agency holding company who liked our creative side, and they wanted our technology side. We had other
Mm-hmm.
people on the technology side who liked the fact that we had the creative and strategy, and that's what they wanted. We ended up doing a deal with a public company called Icon CMT that was a portfolio company of TL Ventures, which was part of the Safeguard family. They did a deal with us in May of 1998, and so we sold the business then. Those investors ultimately got a 7,000% return, 70x on their investment. So
Wow.
the benchmark for VCs is they don't invest in something unless they're going to make 10x, right?
Right.
And even then, they rarely get 10x.
Right.
Uh, but they'll get a larger one, like something like this. And so, this was 70x. Worked out well for the investors, worked out for me, worked out for everybody. I ended up staying on board there for about another year and 3 months or so. They were acquired a couple months after we were acquired. Icon was acquired by Quest Communications, which was a
Mm-hmm.
big telco, the equivalent of Verizon of the Rockies. And they acquired us. And I ended up leaving after that. So went on to do a number of other things, turnarounds. Because of my uh, exit, I ended up getting involved with a couple different VCs who were looking at me and saying, "Hey, we got this problem. We invest in this business, but sort of stuck in the ditch. Can you help us turn
Mm.
it around?" So I did a series of turnarounds for technology companies. One was called Vertical Alliance, which was a CRM enterprise level software platform that we ended up pivoting into a ticketing platform, which ultimately was bought by a group of investors involved affiliated with the Houston Rockets. That actually still exists. That company still exists. Real Time Media, which was a sweepstakes marketing company, ended up turning them around, finding a CEO, full time CEO for them, and they're still in business today. Thriving out in King of Prussia. So, and then did a number of other startups along the way. One was uh, AnySource Media, which was
Mm-hmm.
a technology play designed for doing embedded software for smart TVs when smart TVs came out. And so we basically built that product, was embedded software. And again, this was B to B to C play. We're not selling this to consumers. We're selling this to OEMs, consumer electronics OEMs, who are then in turn embedding it in their products. And that software ended up being installed in probably about 1.5 million LG DVD players around the world. So it
Wow.
was a fun run. We ended up selling that business to a publicly traded company called Divx out in California.
Yep.
And then with that same founder, did another startup in the home automation space called Zonoff, which was a high flyer. A lot of stories involved there, but ultimately that company was sold to Ring, which was then acquired by Amazon. So that technology is still, basically at the root of Amazon's home automation and
Mm-hmm.
security efforts. Along the way, I did a couple other things. I started a coaching business, advising CEOs of professional service firms in many cases on how to scale and grow their business. Because what I found is a lot of entrepreneurs don't have the insights or advisors that I did. As these were angel investors.
Right.
They really, in hindsight, their greatest value was the advice that they gave to me and the insights that they had experienced. Even though they knew nothing about multimedia, they knew nothing about marketing,
Right.
technology, anything, but they understood the underlying basics of business, which is dealing with people, overcoming conflict, resiliency, grit, all those kinds of things. And I was shocked to find that a lot of entrepreneurs don't have that resource, and
Right.
so
Yeah.
and I also found that there's a lot of people running around calling themselves coaches who have never run a business. They're going to be a CEO coach, but they went and got a certificate, for $200 that they're a coach now. And I saw a lot of people just sort of saw an opportunity there. So I basically have worked with a number of entrepreneurs over the years, helping them refine the strategy, and in many cases move to either making it a true lifestyle business or making
Mm-hmm.
a business that is ready to exit. And I've helped a couple of people walk through that exit, both the financial side, which I'm not a financial maven, but it's really the business side. How do you prepare the business for that? And what is the
Right.
emotional side of that? Because there's a big roller coaster there, when you're selling your business and I tell people all the time, when I stood up on this table the morning after we'd negotiated the sale of my first business, it was surreal because we've been up pretty much all night negotiating the final points of this,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, and to stand up to everybody and say, hey, just to let we've done a deal with a company. We're gonna all have a much bigger palette to paint from. Well, we've done a deal. The company's going to be acquired. I'm not going anywhere for the time being, et cetera. And in many ways, that was the happiest day of my life, and also the saddest day of my
Mm-hmm.
life, right? Because we built this amazing culture. I knew it was couldn't remain the same as it had been,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But yet, my primary mission back from that day when my first daughter was born was to secure my family's financial future. What could I
Right.
do to do that? So I had achieved that by the age of 36 or 37, and so I was incredibly happy, but also sad knowing that what we had built was unique, and it was probably not going to remain exactly that way moving forward. As much as we tried, to keep it insulated from
Right.
the acquirer and then the bigger fish that acquired them. The irony of that whole story is that company. So I sold that company to Icon. They were acquired by Quest. Um, my joke is for entrepreneurs, I probably sold that business 1 year too early in May of
Right.
1998, but it's better than selling it one day too late
Right.
in
That's true too.
2000, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so basically, a group of my former senior execs went to Quest and said, "Hey, we want to buy ourselves out. You have nothing to do with us. We're like this little fish inside a fish inside a fish, right?" So they bought themselves out, called themselves Cadient, and
Mm-hmm.
then basically they were operating as an interactive, really focused on pharmaceutical, and then they were acquired by Cognizant, big
Mm-hmm.
multinational. And the irony is, my sister-in-law has never left. She started in 1991 in my living room when the sheriff showed up, and she's been through all those acquisitions and has done very well within Cognizant. So
Wow.
it's funny how you create something and it changes and morphs over time. So
Do you find that I've heard that multiple times from entrepreneurs who do the big, roller coaster up and then sell. Is there any way around that feeling that you had, that sadness that you're getting, you're handing your baby away, you're selling your baby to somebody else? Like, is it, or is it just that's just part of the process and you have to learn to deal with it when you sell your company?
I guess you could negotiate something in up front to basically have this hands off, but it's almost like ironic. Like I mean, somebody's buying it. It's like you sell a car, right? I mean, and the
Right.
guy's like peeling out and grinding through the gears and stuff, and you're like, well, shit, I did make the money off the car, but I have it's a situation like that. I can understand from the owner's perspective. Have one of the things I've actually debated is um, going and uh, pitching VCs basically on hiring me. There's a gap there. I think when people acquire, especially a professional services firm, because you're not getting code, you're getting people. That's the whole thing.
Right.
You acquire this ad agency or this consulting firm or this custom programming shop, et cetera. You're basically buying their people, right? Their
Mm-hmm.
relationships, their
Right.
clients, and their stories, right? So now
Mm-hmm.
my stories become your stories, and this idea of uh, really understanding the mindset of the entrepreneur who's selling that business, because it's very conflicted. If you're super high, you're super happy, but you're
Right.
also super scared and super concerned, right? And so to be able to pay attention to that and make that transition, because uh, the transition can go great or the transition can go terribly. Like for
Right.
example, I'll give you a perfect example. When Icon acquired us, I said to them, "Hey, do you guys have some swag? I mean, why don't you send down a big box of swag?" So because my premise is that look at LA gangs. I mean, they will kill you if you got the wrong color handkerchief, right? I mean,
Right.
people want to
Right.
identify with their tribe or their gang or whatever through
Right.
swag, a T-shirt, a logo, whatever. And he's like, and he just did this multi-million-dollar deal to acquire a business. And he's like, well, you know how much those shirts cost, Bob? I just can't send everybody in your company one of our shirts. I thought that was just incredibly short-sighted, right? Like just
Right. Yeah.
stupid, frankly. And
Right.
and there's little things in that transition when a professional service firm gets acquired that the acquiring firm can stack the odds in their favor just by doing some humane things
Sure.
and
Right.
consideration of what it's like to be acquired up into this larger firm. And it can
Right.
set the trajectory for a much better integration, as opposed to sort of this conflict and concern and worry and, you know, trepidation. So,
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's there's so much that you just said. There's like so many cool stories. Let's switch gears.
okay.
As a very successful entrepreneur and a bunch of other things, how are you keeping yourself healthy? What's your plan on longevity? What are you doing
Yeah.
every day or every week to kind of take care of yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say about, what would be now 7, 8, maybe 9 years. I sort of woke up to health basically and started eating healthier and being more aware. I mean, I just turned 61, so um, it was a change. I'd exercised before then, but I just really started paying attention to what I was putting into my body. So uh, I uh, I take supplements every day in the morning and the evening. I try to eat right. My wife is very good about she's a great cook and very focused on healthy meals. Works out. My workout is walking, fast walking. So I was walking one day and I'm listening to this song. I'm like, oh my god, this song is perfect on my beat of my stride,
Right.
and
Right.
like that's amazing. It's almost like I'm dancing, but I'm exercising, but I'm just
Yeah, it's fun.
walking, right?
Yeah.
And I looked it up and I realized it was 138 beats per minute. And I ended up
Mm-hmm.
putting a playlist together on Spotify. I went out and found all these songs, 138 beats per minute,
Mm-hmm.
and all kinds, rock, pop, jazz,
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
and I walk on that. I walk every day with that, maybe 40 minutes. And then I also am a big fan. We got a infrared sauna a couple years ago, which
You're a big fan of the sauna. My buddy's like a sauna evangelist. So you're a sauna guy. How
oh,
every day or a
it's
couple
yeah,
times a week?
yeah,
Wow.
at least 5 times a week, and it's for 40 minutes. But it's infrared sauna, right? It's not with the rocks and the
What's
heat.
the difference? What is it? Is
Yeah,
there a
you're dealing with
feel
light,
difference?
basically. It's infrared light panels
Right.
inside there,
Okay.
and there's a lot of therapeutic benefits. Ultraviolet light is the stuff that burns you from the sun, right? That's how you get
Right.
sunburned.
Right.
But infrared has a lot of very good healing properties, restorative. It's good for your skin, good for a lot of stuff, basically. And I just come out
Well,
of
you
it
look
energized.
great for 61, man. I can tell you that. Good Lord, you don't look 61. You got a very,
Thank you.
very young face. That's
Yeah,
probably testament to
it's my
staying
it's my
healthy.
bad camera on my computer that helps.
No,
So
it's probably your lovely wife keeping you alive
yeah,
with her
that's
good
true.
cooking and her all the fantastic things she does. Um, so my mystery question that I always ask is, and I'm super interested to hear your answer.
Mhm.
What would you do today if you knew you couldn't fail? Anything on earth, physical, social, anything. What would you do if you knew you could not fail at it?
Wow, that's a good question. Even from a business perspective, or just anything.
I mean, I try not to lead the witness. I don't give the example that I like making you think through it.
Right. Hmm.
Um, it can be physical, social change,
I'll tell you what.
personal
I
change.
just saw it. I just saw a thing on online, and it was. I have this newfound respect for Red Bull. I don't drink Red Bull, but as a
Right.
company, it's unbelievable how they have
Oh yeah.
built that brand, particularly around sports and adventure sports, etc. So I saw these guys. It's the world record. It's the longest. It's on YouTube. I can send you the link. It's unbelievable. These three guys in these wingsuits, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Flying from, I forget how high they went off, and it just goes on and on, like 3 minutes. They're flying through these canyons in Switzerland and stuff. And so,
Yeah.
to me, if I knew I could not fail and I knew I would not smash into a cliffside, I would absolutely do that.
That is a great answer. That's a great answer.
I have a need for. I love speed. I have a need for. I just love going fast. You know, whether it's on skis
I
or
do too.
yeah.
I love the speed. I'm not a big like drops and heights and
Mhm.
but I'm a speed guy, man. I love going fast.
Yeah.
That's a great answer. The kind of token answer I go with is my cousin said climbing Mount Everest.
Mhm.
Right, I thought that was great. That's a great solid answer.
Mhm.
But I may have a new favorite. That's a really good one. And my buddy last week said flying fighter jets. I'm
Mhm.
like that would be pretty damn cool too.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Um, If you so, I mean, look, there's so many lessons and so much cool stuff. What the last question I'll ask is if uh, and it's not how would you do it different, but if you had to start, if, 20-year-old Bob Cooper's coming out and doing his thing and he's going to start his own business, what would your first step actually be? Right? You talked about some missteps, you talked about some things you did great. Like, what would you go out and do, knowing the stuff you know today to start a business from scratch?
Yeah, another great question. I would sort of go back to when I first started Frontier, right? Because it was the same question, like how do I make enough money to support my family, right? And it's
Sure.
like
Yeah.
what are my skills? What do I have to work with? What can I do? And it's like
Right.
I was liking it to that scene in Apollo 13, where the guys are caught up in space and the engineers come in and dump this big box of stuff on the
Yep.
table and say, "This is what we have to work with. How do we get these guys
Right.
back?"
Right.
And that was mine. What do I have to work with? And I had these experiences doing interactive multimedia, so I guess I'll go do that. I'm good at talking. I'm good at selling. I'm good at communicating. I think I'm a pretty good leader. I know some technology, but I'm not a programmer. And so that was it. And what I've come to realize, and I tell people this all the time, is that the beauty of a professional services business or consulting business is there's almost no overhead, right? You can start it today, especially
Yep.
today in the world of the web and all the SaaS businesses that are out there in terms of immediately doing it all yourself, setting up everything from your LLC to getting your logo designed to creating a web presence, etc. But it's a matter of what is your niche and who are you going after. And I'm a big fan of going at the high end of markets or
Hmm.
very niche markets, right? And it
Right.
goes back to that story about us focusing on 12 pharmaceutical companies as opposed to everybody in the yellow pages. Like we're in the Great Valley
Right.
Corporate Center. I would tell them, look at all these business buildings here. This is when people went to the office.
Sure.
I said, none of these companies here are prospects for us. None of them.
Yeah.
They're like us. There are these other businesses or branch offices of these big corporations. We want to go to the mothership. And Jerry Garcia has a great quote. I tell all my coaching clients that you don't want to be the best at what you do. You want to be the only one that does what you do.
Right. Right. A market of one, man.
Right.
That's I firmly believe that. Well, let's wrap it there. That was fantastic, Bob. BobCooper.com. I think you've even got like a very specific URL that people could go to, and I'll link your LinkedIn stuff. But awesome guy, man. Inspirational. A lot of really cool stuff, and I hope people look you up and see what you're up to. So thanks again, Bob. I really appreciate it. But it's great having
All
you.
right. Thanks, Jay. This is a lot of fun. Appreciate it. Take care.
Awesome, Bob. Thank you.